In this video, we're going to be looking at the Russian Revolution. By 1917, the impact of the Great War had been cruel to the Russian Empire. Russia was faced with food and fuel shortages, war casualties were high and kept occurring, and inflation was mounting. In Russia, strikes increased among low-paid factory workers, and the peasants who wanted land reforms were restless and ready for change, ready for a revolution. So we're going to begin with Tsar Nicholas II, the Tsar of the Russian Empire who ruled Russia for a quarter of a century. And the term Tsar is a Russian word that means emperor. Now, under his leadership, Russia had suffered a humiliating defeat against the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War. And unlike most European powers, Russia had remained resistant in adopting many of the enlightened ideals that the rest of Europe had adopted in the 1800s. Things like freedom and voting rights, which again led to unrest among the people of Russia. Now, when Nicholas II came to the throne, he was very highly loved by his people, but with the additions of people like Rasputin and Russia's performance in World War I, these start to damage his reputation, and he is seen as a very incompetent ruler. Now, what Rasputin does is he's a person who comes into the royal family. He's a self-proclaimed holy man who helped the royal family's hemophiliac son. For those of you that aren't familiar with hemophilia, it's a condition in which your blood doesn't clot very easily. So getting something like a paper cut can cause you to bleed to death if not treated. And apparently Rasputin supposedly had these mystic powers and was able to help their hemophiliac son stop bleeding when he had an accident. So he was a very curious figure that becomes very well associated with the royal family, and a lot of Russians don't like that. And of course, Russia's not faring very well in the war, and so these two things combined cause people to very much question his authority and question his competency to rule. And so with the Russian people very upset with how things are going, it will take two revolutions within this Russian Revolution that we're going to be discussing to take Russia from where it was when it entered World War I to what it will become after the war is over. And first we start in 1917, when the Russian people say enough is enough. There we have the February Revolution, the first stage of the Russian Revolution. This first stage centers around Petrograd, which is present-day St. Petersburg. Now, this part of the Russian Revolution, this February Revolution, begins due to food shortages. Many women in this area begin to riot, along with some workers, over demands for bread and food for the poor. But not only that, they're starting to make demands of, we want to be pulled out of the war. We're not happy with the war. End it. If you're not going to do that, we need a new government. And so they start to riot, saying, we want bread, we want to end the war, we want a new government. And so in response to this rebellion that's breaking out in the imperial city of St. Petersburg, Nicholas II sends out his troops, his Cossacks, to put down this rebellion. But as many times this happens, the soldiers he sends to put down the rebellion refuse to attack the rioters and end up joining them. And so by March 2nd, it's pretty obvious that not only does Tsar Nicholas II not have the support of his own people, he's lost the support of the army. And so he is forced to abdicate or give up his throne. And afterwards, a provisional government, provisional meaning temporary, so a provisional government is set up. It's a more democratic government that comes in saying it will handle these things. It will give in to these people's demands. It will help with the bread, it will change the government, but as far as the war, they're going to keep Russia in the war for Russia's pride, to kind of be able to hold their head up high and say, we finished the fight. So the result of this first revolution, the February Revolution, is that Tsar Nicholas abdicates his throne. There is no longer a czar or a king in power. The government of Russia is going to change. What it will change into has to do with this next guy, Vladimir Lenin. He is the head of the Russian Revolution. He's kind of the Maximilien Robespierre was to the French Revolution. Lenin is to this one. He was the head of the Russian Revolution. And he was a strong believer in socialism. He was a Marxist, learning from Karl Marx and believing in a lot of the things that he believed, such as communism. And because of that, like Karl Marx, Lenin believed that capitalism was the source of a lot of the problems happening in Russia, and that capitalism could be destroyed by a violent socialist revolution, which was possible under the right conditions. Lenin believed what was happening in Russia at this time were the right conditions for a communist revolution. And so, with the help of the Germans, Lenin returns to Russia to help lead this socialist revolution against the provisional government, with little success at first. But over time, over the next 8 months, the revolution will splinter into two different factions who attempt to lead this Russian revolution in their favor. On one side, you have the Bolsheviks, the majority. They followed Lenin's ideas of a socialist communist government, like the ones mentioned by Karl Marx back in 1848, and they demanded three simple things: peace, land, and bread for everyone. Peace in that we end the war. Land in that everyone would have access to it, not just the rich, that the peasants would have land reform. And bread in that everyone would have access to food. There would be no more poverty and no one starving anymore. So essentially, socialism taking place there. But the Bolsheviks are only one faction of this Russian Revolution. The other side was a group known as the Mensheviks. They were the minority. They were waiting to see what took place with the provisional government, hoping for kind of an evolution of capitalism that would make things better in Russia. But that's not going to happen, because the second phase of this Russian Revolution, known as the October Revolution, begins when the Bolsheviks, these followers of Lenin, these followers of communism, led by Leon Trotsky, storm the Winter Palace. They arrest and overthrow the provisional government that was staying there. Basically, they kick them out of power. And the next day, Lenin is put in charge of the government, and he takes Russia out of the war. So Russia is no longer involved in World War I. Trotsky is now put in charge of the Red Army, and again, takes Russia out of the war, as we said. And in the end, the Bolsheviks have won. The second phase of the revolution, the October Revolution, has taken what happened during the February Revolution, which is the Tsar lost his power, and now we have the communists coming into power as a result of the October Revolution. And in the end, these Bolsheviks will change their name to communist and form the Communist Party. Yet, not everyone is happy with this new communist government and is willing to fight against it, which brings us to the Russian Civil War. From 1917 to 1922, because not everyone is happy about the new government, we're going to fight an internal war within Russia. On one side, you have the Red Army, this well-organized, led by Trotsky. They support the communist government. On the other side, you have the White Army. They're unorganized, fairly leaderless, and they oppose the new government. And for the next 4 years, this civil war drags on with the two opposing armies, until, still under house arrest, the royal family is moved to a small town controlled by the Red Army to await a trial, similar to how Louis XVI had been put on trial during the French Revolution. Now, most of the world still saw the royal family as the legitimate rulers of Russia, and if they could be captured, they might be able to rally more support for the White Army. And so the Soviets and the Communists, the Red Army, they fear this. And so on July 16th, 1918, fearful that the White Army may recapture the royal family is assassinated. There is no more going back at this point. The revolution would continue to change Russia. And the reason I have that little asterisk there beside royal family has to do with the fact that some might say that not all the royal family was assassinated. There is a very popular legend that the youngest daughter of the royal family, Anastasia, may have survived, and that's kind of become legend in Russia. But back to the Russian Civil War that continued on for another 4 years after the royal family was assassinated, which will eventually end in victory for the Bolsheviks and the Red Army. Soon the Bolsheviks expanded their communist revolution to neighboring countries, surrounding itself with other communist governments that you see here, which eventually would come together in 1922 to form the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, known as the USSR, or more commonly referred to as the Soviet Union, which would go on to become a major player in World War II, whose communist views led it to be an adversary during the Cold War, influencing the next 70 years of world history.